Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to be painting this gloomy winter day across the South Downs. I'm going to be painting it using some paint that I've got left over in my palette because I want to clean out my palette, which is actually a large enamel roasting tray. I find it gives me plenty of room to mix with my large brushes, but it's about time I cleaned it out. So rather than waste the paint, I'm going to mix it all up and paint with it and see what happens. I'm using a sheet of Millford quarter imperial sized cold press paper, and here you can see all the different colours. There's Prussian blue, there's sepia, indigo, paynes grey, there's some burnt sienna there. I'm just going to mix it up any old how on my brush, and together all those colours should create quite a interesting sort of neutral colour. Not got enough water there on the brush. As you can see, I'm painting onto the dry paper, and I want a graduated wash, so I'm just sweeping the brush across loosely horizontal strokes, not really worrying about the colour that I've got there, but actually what it is, I've got quite a nice sort of greenish bluish grey, which will probably lighten back to quite a nice dull winter grey. Just introducing a little bit more brown towards the middle and the lower part, and that will still diffuse down hopefully. But now I'm curving my brush slightly. I'm leaving white gaps which will hopefully give the impression of distant land, maybe with a bit of frost on it. And where I've swept the large brush in shallow diagonal sweeps across the foreground, I have negatively painted my fields. In other words, by leaving the white areas, I have created my foreground fields as well as my distant fields. I shall put a bit of dry brush across them, but I like that bright white sort of frosty look to the field. I think it should work well with this quite dull, gloomy sky. Remember, this is a loose painting. I'm not trying to put in too much detail at this stage. What I just want is to create sort of the impression of this, the distant downs, the South Downs, sort of going to be a view from across the downs, maybe from somewhere near Devil's Dyke in East Sussex. Just going to add some dots and dashes of darker paint here and there, using my small Pro Art Harkey brush. I just want to try and sort of enhance the look of the distance in whatever way I can. I think what I'm going to do is just use my small brush and just create a few lines across the distance just to increase the look of the hills, just to pull out some field boundary marks, just suggestions of that in the distant, gloomy, misty distance. And now back to the small Harkey brush and just pulling it really quickly across that field just to get some dry brush. I don't want much there. And then I'm just going to put some thinner, more watery paint across that sort of back field there. Just fill that one in a little bit. Now with a clean damp brush, I'm just going to see if I can pull out a little bit, or lift out just a little bit of paint across the far distant horizon and just see if that gives me anything. This is Millford paper, so you can lift, but I've got a feeling that my paper is a bit wet for that, so we'll see what happens. Yeah, I can see it's already starting to fill in, but I'm quite pleased because I wasn't very keen on that actually. That was just a sort of an afterthought. So that's the wet in wet paintings almost done. I think I just want to see if I can get a little bit of texture in the foreground. So I've got an old stiff bristle brush, just a cheap old strange brush I've had for years, and I'm picking up some of the darker paint. I'm just going to spatter it across the front. It's all still wet there, so this spattering will lighten up and diffuse. And I'm also going to sprinkle a little bit of salt across the bottom, just to see if the salt will give me some texture, interesting textures and effects in the foreground. So I think I'm going to leave it there, let it dry out completely, and then come back and just put a little bit of detail in, just to finish the painting off. It's completely dry, and you can see it's dried back quite a bit lighter, but in actual fact the painting is a little bit darker and slightly bluer than it shows here, because the sun's coming in through my windows at the moment and making it look a little bit lighter. I'm decided that I'm going to put in a small group of trees just coming out of the foreground bank here, winter trees, so mostly bare branches, maybe a few leaves, and I'm using my sort of medium-sized rigger. I think it's a number 2 or a 3, and I think it's a De La Rowney graduate rigger. And I've mixed up the sort of darkest colour I could get from the brown Paynes grey, a bit of indigo and a little bit of blue in it, the Prussian blue still left on the palette. And I've made sort of a medium thickness, sort of inky consistency, so that the paint will flow. And I'm just painting in the trees. Just want a small group of sort of hedgerow style trees, not big trees. So I'm going to roughly map in the number of trees that I want, trying to get them to look similar but slightly different. Trying to keep the spacing of them a little bit uneven, so it just looks like they've sort of grown up along the hedgerow. I'll make that one a little bit taller. What I'm doing is I'm tapering off my strokes, or applying less pressure towards the end of the brush stroke where the branches get finer. That's the theory, at least. So I'm starting off with pressing quite hard to create quite thick marks for my trunks, and then trying to create lighter, thinner branches by using less pressure. If it all goes on a bit too dark, I can sort of dab it off in a minute while it's still wet and just lighten the ends very slightly. I'm just going to have it looking as if there's a tree just out of sight with the branches just coming in across the tape there. Just a little dab will take some of the paint off in sort of uneven places to stop it from looking sort of too regimented. And now I've got my trees, the number of trees that I want, I've got that established, and I'm now going to sort of flesh out the branches a bit more, and add in quite a few more. I don't want too many, but just enough to give the effect that I want. This can be quite a fun exercise, doing a painting like this, where you just mix up all the paint, the old paints that are left on your palette from previous paintings, and just see what happens. Put the paint on the page and see what you can see in it, see what you can make of it. And the more you practice, the more you experiment, the easier you'll find it to actually begin to paint loosely, where you're not actually painting specific things apart from when you finish the painting off with trees and birds and hedges or things like that. But when you paint your backgrounds loosely, that you paint them freely and as simply as you can, but also paying attention to where you can leave the white of the paper. Now, it takes a bit of practice doing that, but being able to leave large amounts of the white of the paper can actually be very, very effective to create the illusion of certain things, like in this case, the frosty fields. Now I'm beginning to bed the trees into the landscape a bit more with some shadow and some sort of sticks and twigs and things growing up around the trees. So I'm sort of now creating kind of rough hedgerow here. I've changed riggers. This one's much finer. I think it's a 1. I don't know what brand it is because the writing's come off. And I can put in much finer branches, twigs towards the ends of the branches. I'm nearly there now. Keeping on bringing up more from the ground as well, so that it adds to the effect of the hedgerow. Just a tangle of some kind of like old dead weeds and twigs and things. Keeping that nice sort of gloomy winter atmosphere going. Here I've changed to my small Chinese calligraphy brush, and I'm just going to sort of scribble away in this across this shallow diagonal in the foreground, just to create a bit more of the hedgerow bordering this this frosty field with the dry brush, where the texture of the paper is showing through nicely. Just scribbling away with slightly different shades and tones from the dirty old palette, and just really something and nothing really, which is what most loose painters use to describe the way to paint a loose foreground that has only suggestions of detail and nothing specific really painted, but it just sets the scene in a kind of a loose and uncluttered way, hopefully. I'm just going to now dot on some old dead leaves here and there, just on the ends of some of the branches. Don't want to put too many on. Just a few last old dead leaves that are just clinging onto the ends of some of the branches there. Just dab out if it goes on a bit too dark. Smudge it out a little bit. Just little patches of these leaves. I want to sort of have them looking quite random, not too many of them. And now I'm just going to darken up using the small harky brush here and there with the darkest paint I can get, and just try and darken up that bottom left corner a little bit, and across the hedgerow, bring a little bit across that mid-ground field border hedgerow as well. brushed a bit behind the trees too. I think that will just about do for that. I think I'm just going to find a small piece of plastic store card and just scrape through the still wet paint around the base of the trees and across the trunks of the trees, just to add a little bit of texture, to scrape out a bit of paint here and there. That will give me some more sort of sticks and twigs and things like that, and sort of roughs up that area just a little bit more. I think I'm just going to put some birds across the sky, using that same dark colour that I used and mixed up for the trees. I think a few birds just in the top left corner, well, near that area, just will balance up the composition just a little bit more, because there's a lot more space and less detail in that area. I just think the birds will work quite well here. I'm just going to put in just a few little distant fence posts just running across the back of this frosty field, keeping them nice and small, not too evenly spaced. I'll just change from the calligraphy brush to the rigger just to pull across some horizontals just to link the fence, and then dab off if it goes on a bit too dark. And I think that's about all I want to do now. I'll peel off the tape and we'll see how it looks with a border. It's just a quick, loose way to use up the leftover paint on your palette and to practice painting your dry brush and graduated washes, trees, things like that. Well, I think that looks okay. Let's take a closer look, and you can see the dry brush on the unpainted paper, how the texture of the paper, the cold press paper, is showing through. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope that next time you need to clean out your palette, you'll maybe think about doing a painting with the leftover paint rather than wasting it. Well, thanks so much for watching, and thank you so much to my patrons on Patreon who support this channel. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.